Samadhyamam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishwaro Guratmeti Murti Beda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyaptadeyaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Gocharam Govindam Paramanandam Sadgurum Pranatosmyam. Om. Okay, yeah, welcome everybody. Rory's going to take over now, and I'll just sit and listen, and when the Q&A comes, maybe interject. But basically, you guys should ask the questions and let Dave or Rory or whoever did, or Ben or Rory, comment. Insofar as there's some additional, maybe subtle point that hasn't been covered that's required, well, I'll chime in and help. So, good for you. Go for it, Rory.
Go, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. You can
Yep.
hear me. Okay. Hi everyone. It's great to be with you again. Tonight's topic is overcoming mental emotional problems and dealing with vasanas. So we're back to the psychology side of things again, which is actually a really essential component of being able to get the mind appropriately fit and receptive for Vedanta to work. This isn't a topic you'll generally find in the scriptures outside of the Bhagavad Gita. And the Gita was largely actually about Arjuna dealing with his emotional problems resulting from a conflict of dharma. It helps to kind of realize that historically Vedanta wasn't actually taught to the general public. That's actually a comparatively new development by Ishwar's grace. Traditionally, this was a closely guarded knowledge that was only taught to highly qualified students. What happened was the student would actually go and live with the guru at a Gurukulam. I'm not sure how Ramji would feel about that at Mundo Sundaram. But what happened was the student would gradually have the knowledge unfolded over the course of several years. And it's hard to imagine just what an amazing blessing that would be. That was if, of course, the guru decided that the student was an appropriate candidate for receiving self-knowledge. And the gurus could be quite ruthless, actually, if they wouldn't have any hesitation in sending someone away if they didn't have the relevant qualifications. Specifically, what we call the 4 Ds: discrimination or discernment, dispassion, discipline of the mind and senses, and the desire for liberation. These can never be overemphasized because it's the presence or absence of these qualifications that determines whether or not self-knowledge gets converted to liberation. And again, the scriptures almost never go into the mental qualifications and how to attain them in any great detail. It was basically presupposed that the student had already sorted themselves out psychologically and emotionally and already had these qualifications, these entry requirements. That, however, was a completely different time and age. And today's world is a particularly stressful one. And the culture in which we live, it does little to foster a peaceful, contemplative, and tranquil mind. Quite the opposite, in fact. You don't need me to tell you that. You just need to have a look at the headlines on any given day. So while it's generally not the subject matter of Vedanta, it is vitally important for students to learn mind management and the ability to resolve mental and emotional disturbances. Now, obviously, if somebody has severe mental and emotional problems, Vedanta isn't the solution. In such cases, it would be appropriate to get the appropriate psychological help and to work on getting that under control first. But for the majority of seekers, we often just have a few key issues, bandhakas they call them, or blocks, which we can unknot and resolve with the appropriate tools and knowledge. So the talks tonight are about helping to tame the mind and make the mind work for you rather than against you. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start with Ben. And I've had the pleasure of seeing Ben's talk, and it's a brilliant one. It's filled with helpful insights and approaches. And his knowledge, of course, comes from the perspective of not only a skilled Vedanta teacher, but also a doctor who's actually worked firsthand with many helping people deal with such issues. And once Ben's done his talk, I'm going to talk for a little while as well, exploring how the mind and thought works and examining the nature of the vasanas and how we can learn to tame and manage those vasanas. And what we'll do is end with a little self-inquiry that gets us right down to the core of self-knowledge. So I think Ben and I agreed that it might be best to hold off questions until both of us have spoken, unless someone has a really, really urgent burning question, which they can't wait. This is just so we don't end up racing against the clock or having people feel burned out before we've finished. So the Q&A is really important, obviously, but if you have any questions, it might be an idea just to write it down or make a note of it, and we'll deal with the questions afterwards. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Ben.
Hello, everyone. Let me share my slide. So I just shared this about the teachers and the introduction to this. Note the word successful within quotation marks. And let's look at this. So we're starting with, as in Vedanta, there's consciousness, Atma, which I am, and then my structure as it gets more and more dense. Downward slide. With the unconscious as the subtlest and the physical body as the densest as we head down. And then there's death, and then there's an upward little swing again. This is the working slide we'll be using. And on the left of the screen is the same, but in terms of vortices of energy, from the subtlest to the densest, with consciousness at the core of being. A few questions to start with. Who gets affected? And it's the living human being. What's a living being? Any form, and that includes from plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and of course, for us, in the human kingdom, the gift that we have of the intellect with which we can break free. A form manifesting life. And it's interesting that here we are trying to save life, but no one has actually defined what life is. We know we have to save lives, but what is life? It's very hard from a materialistic point of view to explain what it is. Whereas when we come from the knowledge of consciousness, it's the expression of Atma through form. And what happens to the form? Well, we've got the mind and the body. So in the mind, all those words in blue. In the body, there's the life force and how it manifests as the prana, the chi, and the musculoskeletal system, locomotion. What is a living being? And the example we use is this, a robot. So there are two principles here. Electricity by itself doesn't manifest movement. The robot by itself cannot. Why not? Because it is inert. It's lifeless. But bring the two together And you get a mixture, which is an aggregate of electricity with the inert matter. Bringing them together, you get an active robot. So this is the principle we use in explaining what happens to us. There is the consciousness aspect, Atma. Atma is omniscient, does not make mistakes. Matter, on the right-hand side, is inert and is unable to make mistakes. Put the two together, consciousness and matter, and you get a living being. And there are some examples there. And these slides will be available to everyone. The mixture, consciousness, enlivening matter in that combination. And the example that's often used is the sun lends light to the moon. The moon is inert, dull, dead. Yet when the sun lends light, so the moon borrows light from the sun, the moon looks bright, looks shining, looks attractive, but the moon remains in itself as such, inert, dull, dead. That's the application to us as living beings, a person. Our physical bodies, our minds, both matter, dense and subtle, they look alive, look functioning, even doing action in thought, word, and deed. And therefore, it is us as living beings that experience karma and its effects. So the conclusion is that it is the mixture. And as a mixture, I forget. I overlook my inherent nature of consciousness and identify with the form. You know all this. And the picture on the left is, instead of having the left hand and the right hand together, the left symbolizing consciousness, the right symbolizing matter. Instead of being this, it is now this. So consciousness is present. It's just that as a living being, I've forgotten the consciousness aspect, and I try to live my life like a ship without a rudder. The other example is using two hands. The right hand in front is person, and the left hand at the back is consciousness. So this is how we are, but we have forgotten the consciousness we are and think I'm functioning only from person. And so the effects of ignorance, I take on the qualities of my form, which is lack, limitation, mortality. And it is this that is at the core of all emotional distress, in whatever form it manifests. This feeling of incompleteness, of lack. So how does it occur? It's because of that mixture like twilight. Is it rope or is it snake? I can see something, but I don't know what it is. Is it a stump or is it a person? I know there is something, but I don't know what it is. Applied to ourselves, I know I am, but I don't know I am consciousness. Why does it happen? Because of ignorance. Where is it located? In the intellect. And the effect? Emotional distress of various kinds. A quick look at emotion. What exactly is emotion? The important point here is that at the core of every emotion is a thought. And of course, this thought is based on my identification with the form. And if my identification with the form makes me feel incomplete, the thought will be one of incompleteness. Then what we do is we add thought to thought to thought to thought. Now there's a whole aggregation of thoughts. It has a certain emotional energetic weight to it. It's got a charge. And if you look in the middle in those green boxes, in the middle is a thought. It's neutral. When the thought first starts, it's neutral. Then it depends what we do with it. If we add negative thoughts and compound it with more and more negative thoughts, guess what the charge is going to be? Negative. If we add positive thoughts, the charge will be positive. Krishna described it beautifully in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 62 to 63, how with rumination, with thinking about adding thought to thought to thought to thought, and we end up with destruction of oneself. So let's look at a few general principles. In this slide, it's just to show you that there is that transfer of information from the physical brain to the intangible mind. And science still cannot explain how this happens. A lot of theories have been offered, almost based on quantum physics. How does something from matter produce something that is intangible? Whereas what we know is that from spirituality, we come the other way. From something which is subtle, and then there is that condensation of energy, it materializes and appears as a physical structure. And so this is the working slide we started with. What we do is, if you look at the pictures on the left, as a human being, we are intangible mind with tangible body, and it's very tightly held together. All we are doing is, in any form of treatment, any form of health, what we do is we separate the two and we try and work with both. Of course, when there is more physical problem, we have to deal with the body. And then you get a mixture of problems in the body which affect the mind and problems in the mind which affect the body. So we have to unhitch the two to be able to work with each aspect. And these are the treatment modalities then, starting from right at the bottom. And that's where modern medicine is at its best, when we are very close to death, as Ramji can attest. That's where pathological changes happen, and they can be measured with pathology testing, even with the subtlest machines we have, like MRIs, functional MRIs. Things can be detected and therefore can be handled. But as we go up that slide, we come into changes which happened, negative changes which happen in the body. But now we are in a range called functional. We are now in the range of functional medicine. These techniques require subtler methods of trying to find out what's going on. And in natural therapies, for example, we use iridology, using the iris. We use blood, but examined in a different way. And so on. And there are these nutritional methods of finding, like using the saliva, etc. Then as we get more subtle, we come into the energy body, the prana. And that's where acupuncture, etc. come in. Yoga, qigong, etc. And when we come to the mind itself, that's where psychotherapy comes in. The principle, the basic principle in all psychological techniques is trying to change our viewpoint. Even though we are still working at the level of person, we are not working at the level of consciousness, Atma. That's the Paramartika level. We are working at the empirical level, Vyavaharika. So even at this level of person, the whole principle is to see myself as a subject and seeing the emotion as an object. So instead of being identified as the emotion, not with the emotion, being identified as the emotion, getting that separation. Because by seeing the emotion as an object and positioning myself as the subject, that distinction gives a space. And it is that space that gives some relief from emotional distress. Generally, we can look at what all the techniques are and divide them into two, the bio-psychological, and as we get subtler, the psycho-spiritual. So let's look at both. The bio side first, the biological, the physical body. And look, all the physical body needs are these simple things. Clean, fresh air, clean water, nutritious food, regular elimination, sufficient exercise, adequate rest. And if you look at air, water, and food, we, as human beings, we've successfully contaminated the lot. And the body, we need a good physical body, because if we don't have a physical body, we are not here on earth. And if we are not here on earth, we don't have an intellect with which to break free from samsara. The physical body is important. Now, there's a lot of knowledge you have, so I'm just going to give an overview of the body-mind connection, starting with the basics, water. So the body is 66% water. And it's interesting that the brain is even more dilute, 73% water. And if you notice that funny word there, lunar, as in the moon. So if the moon can produce tides in the ocean, why wouldn't it have an effect on something that's 73% water? And it's well known in the psychological wards in the hospital. If it's full moon, everyone take care. So water. And that's what we need to replace the body with. And we know that the effects of dehydration can have not only physical, but also cognitive effects. Can't think clearly. Mood changes with dehydration. Then food, you know, we need a healthy diet to balance things. A child recently was asked to name the 5 food groups. You know what they are. So there's protein, carbohydrates, fats, the nutrients, and water. And guess what this child said? McDonald's, Hungry Jacks, etc., etc. So we have successfully confused our young ones. The 5 food groups, and a good balance, because we know that both when the body mass index is too high, or when people have starved themselves, as in various illnesses, there are mood disorders and there are changes in self-esteem. And we know from the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 17, those verses there, how foods affect the mind. Once in Swami Dayananda's ashram, the cook, he was quite a Rajasic guy. And one day he was really angry. And for breakfast, when he made the usual breakfast called upma, he threw in a handful of chili powder. That day, everybody in the ashram was hyper. Foods affecting the mind. And we know also that prenatal maternal diets have an effect on the fetus. So if there is a deficiency of the omega-3 fatty acids, for example, too much of the refined carbohydrates, there are effects on the fetus. And in addition, there are effects on adults as such. There was an interesting study on schizophrenics, and they found that 4% could reduce their medications if they went on a strict gluten-free diet. This is not to encourage you to go on a gluten-free diet, but just some information about how diet can even affect very serious psychological problems. The gut is known as the second brain. It produces as much serotonin as the brain does. And there is that nerve called the vagus nerve, which starts in the brain and goes right throughout the whole body. So that's why the term vagus, you can see the word vagabond. It just innervates the whole gut. And so that's the gut-brain connection, where a lot of research is going on, the effect of the vagus nerve. And the gut too has a lot of our protective tissue called the lymphoid tissue. So it's connected again, not just with cognition and emotion, but also with immune health. And there's a branch here called psychoneuroimmunology, meaning from thought to the nervous system to the immune system. And we know how we need good bacteria in the gut. It's called the biome. We need that for good health. And traditional systems of medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine, have made those connections, like connecting the large intestine with the lung and the skin, the small intestine with joy in the heart, etc. And we'll see that in a minute. And from Ayurvedic medicine, one of the principles in that 5 activities they do called Panchakarma, one of them is every change of season, do a bowel cleanse. And there are different ways. So in the West, we've got colonic irrigation. And what could also be suggested is using that bowel preparation that's done for colonoscopies. So just a simple one, once every 3 months, to keep the bowel healthy by removing any toxic material out from the colon. And the principle there is a clear bowel is connected to a clear mind. Supplements. Now, this is a fairly contentious area. The whole principle in natural therapies is to balance the neurotransmitters in the physical brain. Notice physical brain, not the mind. So there are neurotransmitters in the brain, like those mentioned there, some which help and some which prepare the body for a flight or fight response. And the problem in modern society is that we've got so much of the fight and flight that the body is not able to relax. So the drive is a sympathetic drive, which overcomes the parasympathetic drive of rest, relaxation, nutrition. By trying to change those transmitters, we hope to get some effect in the physical body, but having its counterpart in the mind. This must always be done under the care of someone qualified, because there are people who have used lots of supplements and ended up with liver problems. So care must be taken. For example, if you use a multivitamin with a lot of vitamin B6, you can have so much B6 that it damages your peripheral nerves and you end up with peripheral neuritis. So we say, but it's a natural vitamin. Yes, but in too much, in too high a dose, it can cause damage. Another example are the fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. They are all fat-soluble, which means that they can be stored in the fatty tissues in the body, and one can go into toxicity. So that's why it has to be done under the care of someone. In any mental health issue, these are the compulsory 3 that must be had. The B complex vitamins. And the Bs work as a group. You cannot just pick one B and hope to use that. You need a complex because they work as a group. For example, if you have too much of B6, you could be deficient in B2. So the B complex, and you can use that as a multivitamin. The next one is the omega-3 fatty acids, critical for the functioning of the brain. After all, the brain is mainly fat, cholesterol, and we need something fatty to work with it. And the suggested dose is 2,000 milligrams twice a day. Most capsules are 1,000, so 2 in the morning and 2 at night. And finally, magnesium. Now, when you get your magnesium, you got to make sure it's not magnesium oxide. That's Epsom salts, and it's not absorbed at all. It's very poorly absorbed. But because it's so cheap, it's found in many formulations. But it's useless. You got to look for other forms of magnesium, like magnesium chelate, oxalate, magnesium orotate, etc. Anything except oxide. And when you look at the elemental magnesium, you need about 150 milligrams twice a day. So remember, this is working on the physical brain, trying to change the neurotransmitters. Then we've got the herbs. They're called nervine herbs. And the word there is trophorestorative, meaning, if you look at the hands together, if there is too flaccid, then the like a violin string that's too loose, these herbs can bring it back to normality. If it is too tight, like a violin string that's too tight, these same herbs can bring you back to balance. So that's called trophorestoration. And these are the kind of herbs that are commonly used. Some from Western herbs, some from Ayurvedic herbs, some from Chinese medicine. And we know, and I'm sure you all know, that low serotonin is associated with depression. So how do we raise that? Well, we use substances like SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine. Now, it's not the meth of crystal meth. This is methionine. And we start with 400 milligrams twice a day. It must never be used in states of anxiety because it worsens anxiety. That's one of its side effects. So you notice even a healthy substance can have side effects. And vitamin D3 and St. John's wort has been traditionally used. The next one is sleep, because sleep restores that natural balance in the circadian rhythm. Insomnia is a big problem today because insomnia affects mood, cognition. It's the principle that's used in torture. Keep a person awake, and after 3 or 4 days, they'll break down. Sleep. And therefore, we need good sleep hygiene. The bedroom must only be used for sleep, nothing else. We should not be using our computers in there, certainly not answering our emails, using our mobile phones. And the principle is this: what we see coming on the screen, coming towards our eyes, are actually light particles. They're called photons. So when a photon enters the eye, the message goes to the brain, the pineal gland, and the brain reads it as, oh, this is daytime. And therefore, the amount of melatonin drops. We need melatonin to help us sleep. It's a natural rhythm that as the sun rises, the level of melatonin drops. As the sun sets and darkness comes in, then the level of melatonin rises. So when we go at night, when we spend more time with our computers, TV, etc., those photons coming in, naturally, the level of melatonin is going to drop. So at least an hour before bed, we should turn off things. Supplements that can be used to help with sleep, melatonin. It only mimics the same melatonin that the brain produces. SAMe can help, and the vitamin D3. And we know excessive sleep is a symptom of depression. And trying to get the person to change that routine instead of sleeping till midday, 1 a.m., 1 p.m., trying to change that routine very gradually so that they've got regular sleeping hours. Exercise, lots of studies showing how exercise helps depression, and roughly 30 minutes, about 3 times a week. And the other benefit of exercise is exposure to sunlight, and that too has been shown to help in depression. As we get subtler, then there's energy healing. And we know acupuncture too has helped in management of emotions. And there's one particular one called Heart 7 at the wrist. And it's interesting in traditional Chinese medicine how they've linked an organ with an emotion. And the examples are there. With the heart, sadness. With the lung, grief. With the kidney, fear. With the liver, anger. With the spleen, worry. And so their approach is to manage these using the acupuncture meridians. They also use herbs and cupping, different techniques. It's a whole different way of understanding physiology and pathology. And we have yoga with pranayama, how the breath manages emotions, qigong, tai chi, reiki, etc. So for mild to moderate health problems, qualified psychotherapists. With severe ones, that's where medical intervention may be needed. Medication, psychiatry, and sometimes even admission into hospital, especially when there's suicide involved. From the Human Genome Project, there are now pathology tests that can match according to what your gene profile is, particularly in the liver, which medications would suit you. So it's individualizing medication now. This is particularly applicable to antidepressants, which ones not to use and which ones to use depending on the genetic profile. It's looking at the enzyme system called the P450 enzyme system, which detoxifies and metabolizes the different substances that come into our body, from food to nutrients to medications. So there are parallels in terms of health problems, physical problems with psychological problems. And we can see how with the physical body, there's a gradation from mild to moderate severe. And so the treatment modalities apply at different levels. Same thing with mental deterioration. We get mild to moderate to severe. So severe would be like the psychosis, bad neurosis, major depressive disorders, etc., where much heavier methods need to be used. And again, another comparison is for good physical health, it's not just trying to look at the environment. We also have to look at our own immune system for good health. In parallel then with mental issues, not only the environment, not only the setup around us, but also our inner resilience. That's the biological side. Now the psychological side. And so there are many schools of psychotherapy and therefore many techniques according to what each school proposed. All these lists there. There's one called the behavioral school and cognitive behavior therapy. And the principle there is learning to be a witness. In ordinary thinking, most people associate an event and the reaction that happens from it. Whereas in cognitive behavior therapy, They say, no, it's not a direct reaction. There is a belief behind the reaction. It's to try and discover what that belief is, drawing on experiences which confirm, yes, the negative belief, it does exist, but also looking at experiences that prove positive reactions, which obviously must come from a positive belief. So the whole principle there is just identify what that belief is and replace it. And that's where the psychotherapy comes in. The whole principle here is learning to be a witness, a subject, as person, at the person level. There is the psychoanalytic school of Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist. He's the one who introduced terms like the collective unconscious and archetypes. Interesting, he was fascinated by Buddhism, studied a bit. He did travel to India in 1937-38 and supposed to have met Ramana Maharshi. The meeting did not happen. I'm not sure why. From the psychoanalytic school, another school developed called the School of Experiential Psychotherapy. So this is using experience, not just lying on a couch or on a chair and talking, not just words and words, but this using the physical body too, experiencing it. And that's an institute in Big Sur. And Stanislav Grof was a psychiatrist associated with them. Interesting, he's from Czechoslovakia. And in the 1970s, he was given permission to use LSD to treat psychological problems. They use a principle called holotropic breathwork, circular breathing. It's a form of controlled hyperventilation. And they use music in the background, evocative music, and at the same time doing body work. So you can see the mind, the prana, and the body are all involved in this. And of course, you need a trained practitioner. You must not do this by yourself. What happens with that hyperventilation, controlled hyperventilation, is that the conscious mind is bypassed. And so whatever is in the subconscious arises, is experienced, and awareness is brought to the problem, gaining insight into the issue. And that reduces the intensity. So learning to be the witness subject. It has been applied in two particular areas called sand play and voice dialogue. Sand play is interesting. Carl Jung himself, when he had his lunch, he would go to Lake Geneva and doodle in the sand. And he would not rub it off, but add to it each day that he went. And he realized that what he had done was just transferred what was in his mind onto the sand. Sand is used as a metaphor for the subconscious. Figurines are placed in the sand representing the different emotions and their interactions. In other words, using the sub-personalities to come to some understanding of what's going on. In this picture, for example, if you look, there's that sunflower in the middle and a lamb, and there are two foxes that are about to attack. What does that mean? That's where the client would explain to the practitioner, and the practitioner would help the client to understand what's going on. Voice dialogue is using the different sub-personalities to speak to each other. At the bottom of the slide, you see the witness cushion. They're learning to be the subject witness. That's the witness cushion. So the client sits on the witness cushion and places different cushions around, representing the different emotions. In other words, personifying the emotions. And the witness then would pick one cushion and have a conversation with that cushion. The person would then sit on that particular cushion. So let's use sad, for example. So from the witness cushion, the person would sit on the sad cushion and speak. It would say what it is, why it's there, how it came to be there, and what it wishes to be done. The person is asked to give it a shape, even a body posture, give it a color, give it a name, a sound. So can you see how they are making the emotion into an object? Then the person comes from the sad cushion back to the witness cushion and speaks and says, okay, what I learned from this interaction is XYZ. Interesting, Winston Churchill, he had quite a bad depression, but he called it his black dog, which would follow him everywhere he went. Psycho-spiritual. So now we're coming subtler. Not only is there the personality, but also that sense of something bigger than me, still at the level of person. And we can relate to a particular form or to a universal principle. And one way of connecting is obviously through prayer, a personal connection. There's a study done in an intensive care unit in the US. You know what it's like in intensive care? Well, the patients are unconscious. It's a controlled coma state. One group were prayed for, and another group exactly the same, but not prayed for, and they found certain differences. It was not a proper study, just an empirical work done. But interesting that it was reported in one of the journals. Yoga, Ashtanga yoga, the Ashtanga meaning eight limbs. What that does is it integrates the layers of our personality, the 5 layers. The 8 are listed there, and you can see how they help. Like yama, niyama, the do's and don'ts, stabilize the heart, the emotional body. Asanas and diet with the physical body. Pranayama, you know how the breath is the pulse of the mind. So it helps the mind in the antakarana in a general way. Pratyahara, the withdrawal of the sense organs. So learning how to manage the sense organs. And it's one of the 4 Ds in the 6 disciplines of the mind, managing the sense organs. Then dharana and dhyana, steady the intellect, the buddhi. And samadhi. Samadhi is not a blissed out semi-conscious state. It comes from the Sanskrit meaning sama, steady, even, balanced, mental equipoise, and di, meaning the mind. So it's that steady, equanimous state of mind which can deal with whatever problem comes. Difficult problems, steady. Pleasant circumstances, steady. And Shankara has commented on Ashtanga Yoga. He made a sub-commentary on Vyasa's commentary of Patanjali Sutras, but he himself gave some Vedantic equivalents to the 8 limbs. I've listed them here. I'm not going through them. The ones in italics are the Ashtanga Yoga. The rest that are not in italics are Shankara's explanations. Then we've got Vipassana. This is a personal favorite, but certainly mine. Vipassana is a Buddhist meditation technique, and it's based on a particular sutra of the Buddha called the Mahasatipatthana Sutra. In the West, we've got 2 main schools, the Goenka school and the Mahasi tradition. And it's 10 days of silent retreats. So during the silence, you're not just letting your mind waste away. We learn to closely watch. Watch what? We start with simple things like the breath, watch body sensations, watch body movements, like as we walk, can we focus on the movement of the foot, how we raise, push, drop, raise, push, drop. Then we look at the mind. Thoughts arise. So we observe how they arise, when they arise, what happens when they arise, and how, as with everything else, how they fade away, replaced by another thought, or an emotion can arise. This is effective training to be a witness subject at the level of person. To gain some benefit, at least 3 10-day retreats need to be done. So what it does is it leads to a highly sattvic mind. And from Vipassana, it's now being used generally. The breath, for example, is being used generally in society to calm the mind. Parents tell their children, stop, especially when it gets rowdy, stop, breathe. And the term mindfulness is now being used in psychotherapy. All it means is paying attention to what is happening right now. Let's look at the benefit and limitation. What's the benefit? All these delightful states of mind. Notice states of mind. Feeling good at the level of person. And it gives relief from emotional distress. And that IQ plus EQ in balance gives us that resilience. And in these two verses from the Bhagavad Gita, change is the only constant in life. That's what we have to deal with. Swami Paramarthananda has used these terms, the 5 C's: calmness, confidence, clarity, cheerfulness, courage. The 4 S's: self-respect, serenity, surrounds harmony, the setup around us, harmonious, and spiritual growth. So in other words, a steady sattvic mind. And with that, then the person is ready for immortality, as in verse 215 in the Gita. So as a person, I want to be happy and I want it to remain. I want to keep it. Feels natural to be like that. No doctor's ever had a patient who's come and said, look, I've been happy for the last 6 months. What's wrong with me? You never hear that. And when there's any unhappiness, anything unpleasant, I cannot wait to eliminate it as soon as possible, like the dust in the eye. Can't rest till we've got rid of it. What's the limitation? Temporary, limited, only partial relief from emotional distress. In other words, it's not resolution, only reduction, palliation. And again, Swami Paramarthananda has used this acronym, a reduction in FIR, F-I-R, a reduction in the frequency of episodes. Excuse me. So they get less and less often. And even if they do occur, the intensity is less. And the time needed to recover from the episode also gets less. So instead of going on for hours or days or weeks, it's very brief. So reduction in FIR. How do we measure intensity? Does it occur only in thought? Does it occur in thought plus word? Notice it's getting a bit more intense. And most intense when there's thought plus word and an action is done. So that's how intensity you can measure for yourself. A reduction in FIR. So it's a recurrence, but it's less disruptive and it's better managed. As was said earlier, it's a sattvic mind, which is an enjoyable state of mind, but the gunas are still ruling us. We are still trapped. Yes, better to have a sattvic mind rather than a rajasic, tamasic mind, but all three, we are still trapped. What's the solution? Self-knowledge. A change from person subject to consciousness, Atma, capital S subject. And that's the domain of Vedanta. Thank you. So I'll stop share. Now over to Rory.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was an absolutely fantastic talk. And I really feel that you've done the heavy lifting tonight because there was so much went into that. And I'm sure it'll be of help to a great many people. Yeah. Before I actually start, I was just gonna ask Ramji and Sundari and everybody, if anyone would like to take a short break before I start talking, or just a 5-minute break, or if everyone's ready for me to chime in, just see how everyone feels.
I'm fine with it, Rory.
You're
Up to
fine?
anybody else.
Okay,
I'm good.
fantastic. Well, will I just start then? Okay, there's been no objections, so I'm just gonna go for it. Right. Yeah, again, I really appreciated Ben's talk. It was wonderful and very illuminating. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to come up with a topic which I thought would nicely complement what Ben was talking about. So what I wanted to do was to, as I said before, just briefly explore the nature of the mind, thought, and the vasanas. Because you talk to any Vedanta student, and they'll invariably start lamenting the vasanas. And oh goodness, I'm trying to get rid of all these vasanas, this vasana, that vasana. The vasanas get quite a bad rap. So I'm going to explain just a little bit about what they are, how they form, and how they can be managed. And provide some tips and pointers for weeding out those binding self-destructive vasanas which cause seekers so much pain and suffering, and which prevent the full assimilation of self-knowledge, which is what we're all here for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by, in simple terms, taking a look at the nature of the mind. And I happen to be a writer, and I started off writing novels. And one of the first things I learned when I was learning to be a writer is the importance of the maxim, show, don't tell. And obviously that can be quite hard when you're doing a talk like this. But rather than just telling you about the nature of the mind, I thought it would be more interesting to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to guide you through a little 30-second meditation. It's an easy peasy meditation, so don't worry about getting it wrong, because there's no right or wrong. It's just a simple exercise in observation. And I think it's actually quite similar to Vipassana meditation as mentioned by Ben. So what we're basically going to do is just take a few seconds to observe the mind and how thoughts form. So if everyone wants to just take a moment to shrug off any tension, just get yourself comfortable and have a little stretch if you need to. And when you're comfortable, I'd like you to close your eyes and take a deep breath. Now, what I want you to do is simple. I want you to quietly observe your mind and just watch for the very next thought that appears. Just hold an attitude of curiosity and think to yourself, I wonder what my next thought will be. And then just wait and watch. Now, it'll either be in the form of a visual image, a visual form, or it might appear as a verbal thought, as words in your mind. So don't have any expectations and don't judge. There's no right or wrong here. Just observe. And you might actually find that even if your mind is generally quite busy and filled with all kinds of thoughts, it might become surprisingly shy the moment you begin consciously observing it and waiting for a thought to arise. But just watch, just be aware of whatever thought appears next, and I'll be quiet for a few seconds. Okay, so you can open your eyes and take it easy. Now, I'm guessing that after a moment or two, something took shape in the mind. An image may have begun appearing, or maybe something verbal. It might have been a memory, maybe a reminder that you have to, I don't know, go and buy cat food or phone or text somebody. Maybe you found your mind galloping with thoughts, or maybe it was still and quiet for the most part. Now, the purpose behind this was to help demonstrate how the mind works. As you probably noticed, there were two factors present: consciousness and thoughts appearing in consciousness. We experience the mind as an open expanse of reflected consciousness, in which the various thoughts we have arise and subside. The mind itself is amorphous, which means that it doesn't have a particular shape or form of its own, but it takes on the form, it takes on the shape of the various thoughts that arise in it. And the Sanskrit word for these thoughts is vrittis. Vritti literally means whirlpool, current, or eddy. So if your mind is like a vast lake or ocean, these vrittis are like little currents or waves or bubbles appearing upon the surface of the water. They're modifications of the basic substrate of the mind. Now, the vrittis arise from the mental substrate, and they seemingly have a life and momentum of their own. You probably noticed in the little meditation that we just did that you didn't have to consciously conjure them. They just appeared and they took shape and they did their thing. Some of these vrittis are fleeting and pass by quickly, barely leaving a trace, while others generate more of an impression, rippling across the entire mind, creating significant disturbance. Here's the thing, though. Everything that we experience in life are but vrittis appearing in the mind. Absolutely everything. Even the world that you think you're experiencing out there, the computer that you're watching this on, and the Scottish guy who's talking right now, it's all just appearing to you as vrittis in your mind. Whether it's inside or outside, everything you experience is actually just thought. And the Yoga Sutras actually go into this in quite a bit of detail. And it's useful to know this for mind management. There are 5 basic forms of vritti, and I'm afraid I don't have any slides like Ben had. I was far too lazy to make slides. Just bear with me. The first type of vritti is called a pramana. And you've probably heard Ramji use the term pramana in reference to Vedanta. A pramana is a means of knowledge, which means that a pramana vritti is what enables you to know and perceive things. For a start, they allow you to know and experience the physical world. The senses basically feed sensory data into the mind, and these take the form of vrittis, thoughts. The mind actually takes on the shape of these thoughts and becomes the object. And that's how we experience objects. So what we experience as being the world out there is actually just a vritti arising. And if you think about it, you don't experience the world outside of your mind. You don't somehow project yourself out of your body and experience the world out there. The senses are relaying data into your mind where it takes the form of thoughts. And like the shape-shifting thing that it is, the mind assumes the very shape and form of those thoughts. So what you're experiencing is actually an inner mental representation of reality. The bottom line is that you can never experience anything outside of your mind. The mind is your carrier of reality, the medium by which you experience things. Even if you're experiencing something externally, you're actually experiencing it inwardly via thought. So a pramana vritti is how you receive knowledge of the world and the environment and knowledge in general. This knowledge comes not only through direct sensory experience, direct sensory perception, but also through inference and testimony. The second type of vritti is called viparaya. If a pramana is a means of correct knowledge, a viparaya is a means of false knowledge. And we're subjected to this all the time. In fact, it's the very basis of Maya. We're perceiving something, it's there, but it's not actually what it appears to be. And the classic example, which Ben mentioned briefly, is the good old rope and the snake. In twilight, we have enough knowledge to see that there's something there, but we misapprehend what we're seeing. It looks like a snake, so we think that it's a snake, but the snake is a viparaya, a vritti of false knowledge. This is closely related to avidya, wherein the mind is contaminated by ignorance. And this ignorance happens to be the root of samsara and all our suffering. This leads us to the third type of vritti, a vikalpa. This is a thought which is flat out imagination or fantasy. And we entertain such vrittis all the time. We're frequently off on head trips, imagining all kinds of things, whether it's a conversation with our boss that we're dreading, or imagining we've won the lottery or traveled to the moon. Human beings are prone to fantasizing about all kinds of things. And sometimes we even mistake these vikalpa vrittis as being real, which is the source of a lot of our problems. As a species, we're having significant problems right now agreeing to a basic consensus of what constitutes objective fact and reality. And there is, in fact, such a thing as an objective world, an objective reality. In Vedanta, we call that Vyavaharika Satyam, the empirical world, the shared reality in which all the jivas function. This is in contrast to Pratibhasika Satyam, the jiva's private world of fantasy and imagination, which we are often prone to confusing with objective reality. Now, vrittis also take the form of smriti, which means memory, or smriti vritti. I'm not making this stuff up. When you were observing your mind a few moments ago, you might have suddenly remembered things like what you had for dinner last night, or what you did last Sunday afternoon, or a funny joke that somebody told you. So we experience vrittis in the form of memory as well. And lastly, the final type of vritti is a subtle form of vritti called nidra, or sleep. The sleep state is experienced as a very subtle but potent vritti, in which tamas predominates and is something which everyone is intimately familiar with and which we all enjoy. So we have the mind, which, illumined by consciousness, is our carrier of reality and our medium by which we experience objects both gross and subtle. And we have the vrittis, the various modifications of the mind, the thought currents by which we experience and know everything, both true and false, real and imagined. Each vritti that arises leaves an impression in the mind, an imprint. Some thoughts just breeze by, leaving little trace at all, whereas other thoughts really impact us and compel us to take action. And that's where we get the vasanas. Sorry, I need to keep drinking because I get a dry mouth from one of the medications I'm on. And I generally don't tend to speak this much anyway. For instance, let's say I'm thirsty, which I have been, and I think about a cup of tea. I'm suddenly compelled to take action and go and make myself a cup of tea. I drink the tea and I'm satisfied. But this thought and action leave an imprint. I'm thirsty, I drink the tea, I like the tea and I am therefore compelled to drink another cup of tea next time I'm feeling thirsty. And I do. And that again reinforces the loop of that impulse action and reaction. That's basically how vrittis become vasanas. I get a thought, I act on the thought, and if this creates a pleasing reaction, I'm therefore inclined to keep performing the action whenever the impulse arises. So before long, I wake up in the morning and I practically sleepwalk my way through to the kitchen. And I'm not fully awake until I've had my tea, which is really not far from reality, to be honest. At this point, is the dog wagging the tail or is the tail wagging the dog? That's vasanas in a nutshell. The thought arises, creates a sense of desire, we act upon the desire, and this creates and strengthens the vasana. So you might think of asanas as being like grooves in consciousness. And these grooves compel us to perform certain actions. Each time I do give into that action, it reinforces the tendency until it almost becomes an automatic reflex. Now, once again, if you ask any Vedanta student, vasanas get a bad rap. Everyone's trying to get rid of their vasanas. And some teachers even purport that in order to be enlightened, you need to destroy all of the vasanas. Fortunately, that's neither necessary or possible. Vasanas are, in some respect, they're like the engine of creation. At a causal level, it's actually the vasanas that wake you out of sleep in the morning. They sprout like spring flowers and compel you to get out of bed and to take action. In my case, having a cup of tea. And of course, you actually need your vasanas to function in the world and get you through the day. Otherwise, every single thing that you do would be new to you. You wouldn't remember how to boil an egg or drive your car. And you may remember when you started driving, you had to spend considerable time and effort on each and every little maneuver, learning how to put the car into gear, how to start the engine, steer and navigate the roads, and hopefully avoid running anyone down. Fortunately, with enough practice, you develop a driving vasana, and you're able to hop in your car and drive off with no particular effort on your part. So we do get positive vasanas. The very fact that you're watching this right now means that you have a vasana for Vedanta and for spiritual growth. Otherwise, you'd all be doing something somewhere else, watching Netflix or whatever else. So it's perfectly fine to leave our helpful, positive, constructive vasanas alone because we need and rely on them. Similarly, it's fine that we have non-binding vasanas, which are habits that fall under the category of preference rather than imperative. You can have a vasana for tea, as I've said, or for cake, or for watching your favorite TV show or whatever. That's fine. If it's a non-binding preference, if you're not able to act upon that vasana, if you have to miss your tea in the morning or whatever, it won't be the end of the world for you. You just take it on the chin and move on. The problem, of course, is the not so helpful vasanas, the binding vasanas, as we call them. These are the ones that completely agitate, extrovert, and even cripple the mind. These are the things, actions, and experiences you get completely addicted to and which have a deleterious effect on your mind, your psyche, and your life. Now, these vasanas vary from person to person, but they might include addictions to alcohol, drugs, sex, pornography, gambling, the internet, social media, scrolling endlessly in Facebook and TikTok or whatever. But when you lose yourself to addictive binding vasanas, you lose control over your mind, your life, and ultimately your destiny. You end up squandering your precious life energy and wasting your spiritual potential. At worst, you almost become like a junkie. You lose control over your faculties. And when that happens, Dharma often goes out the window. The mind is overcome by Rajas and Tamas, and you lose the clarity and harmony of Sattva. You basically lose touch with the peace, joy, and wholeness of your own essential nature. Of course, most of the problematic vasanas aren't necessarily severe ones like addiction issues. The problem may be far subtler and more insidious. Some of the most harmful vasanas are the ones related to low self-esteem. Sadly, many of us grow up with a very dysfunctional, negative self-esteem. And I'm sure many of you probably know what I'm talking about. What happens is the ego basically turns on itself, constantly berating itself and judging and comparing itself with others. And you feel that you never quite measure up to this illusory image you have of perfection, which you've just conjured or had conditioned into you, this idea of how you think you should be. This often stems from childhood issues and various kinds of trauma, as well as toxic or unhealthy relationships, and from societal conditioning. Now, I'm painting a very bleak picture here, but it's not all bleak. And the truth is, liberation isn't possible until you've learned to master your addictions, compulsions, and psychological blind spots. The qualifications are essential for Vedanta to work. And if your negative vasanas are running the show, you're not going to be able to cultivate the necessary discrimination, dispassion, and so on. So we need tools to help us to manage and neutralize any binding, self-destructive vasanas that might be incapacitating the mind and robbing us of our ability to contemplate and assimilate self-knowledge, which is our ticket to freedom. Now, if you have severe psychological issues and addiction issues, you really should be addressing that at that level rather than at spiritual level. And you do that by seeking a qualified therapist, as Ben said. In general, though, I've tended to find that Vedanta students tend to be quite mature psychologically and are usually able to deal with the problem through self-management. To that end, I wrote an article a while back called Mind Management 101, the Vasana Busting Toolkit. And I think Georg left a link for that at the start of the chat. I'm not going to go into that in great detail. I'm going to leave you to kind of look through that in your own time. But just briefly, the article talks about the 3 foundational yogas: Dharma Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Upasana Yoga, or meditation on and devotion to Ishvara. Together, these purify the mind like nothing else because they spiritualize your daily life and alchemize the lead of mundane living into the gold of spiritual devotion. In the article, I've also shared a step-by-step process of self-inquiry, which in Vedanta we call Pratipaksha Bhavana. This is the means by which we take a negative thought, and at the root of every binding destructive vasana, you will find a negative thought, belief, or assumption. And we use a simple process of self-inquiry to neutralize that thought, and then replace it with the opposite thought, which completely then overrides the initial negative thought, which was based on ignorance. This is a simple process, but it's incredibly effective and is something which every Vedanta student really should learn and become proficient at. If negative self-defeating thoughts, if those are something that you struggle with, then this is a practice that you definitely need. It's something you can work away at until eventually you'll find you no longer even need it, because the process, it takes on a life of its own and becomes almost automatic. The article also talks about managing the gunas, learning to discriminate satya from mithya, taking an inventory of your values and learning to practice objectivity. Now, there's obviously quite a lot in there, so it's something which you can bookmark and make back where you kind of feel the need. It's a combination, basically, of the things that really truly helped me in my own journey, along my often bumpy journey to taming the mind. And so happens I was talking to a friend who was interested in Vedanta. He didn't really know anything about Vedanta, but he was quite interested in it, and he was asking questions. And he came to a certain point and he looked at me and said, well, that must have been really easy for you because you're a really laid back, chilled out person. And I kind of thought, well, I am now in large part, but I really had to fight. I had to fight the vasanas to get to that stage. I had to put in a lot of work. So, yep, a peaceful, contemplative, steady mind, it takes work. It doesn't happen overnight, and it does sometimes necessitate tremendous effort on the part of the seeker. But it's always effort very well spent. So what I want to do is to end this talk with a simple self-inquiry. I'm going to talk you through it, and I hope I'm able to make this as clear as possible. Because if you get this, this is basically how you can break free, not by tackling each vasana one by one, by chopping them down branch by branch, but by taking the axe of discrimination and chopping the entire tree of ignorance down. Because no doubt you've already found that trying to eradicate the vasanas one by one is an exhausting process. The moment you think you've gotten rid of one, you can be sure that another will rear its ugly head. It's a bit like, I don't know if you've heard of the ancient Greek myth of the Hydra. And the Hydra was a dragon-like monster with multiple heads. It had hundreds and thousands of heads. And it was a really ugly, nasty critter. And it was impossible to fight too, because the moment you cut off one head, heads grew in its place. And vasana busting, as I call it, vasana busting can be a bit like that. The moment you've got one sorted, along pop another two. So here's the way to really get to the heart of it. The key is to use self-inquiry to get to the root of the entire false identity of the ego. These vasanas, the problematic ones, are colored by the impurities of rajas and tamas. The mind is actually sattvic in nature. This sattva allows it to reflect the light of consciousness and enables us to know things, to see, to understand, and to know. Sattva is revealing by nature. So rajas and tamas are the impurities of the mind, and they distort our thinking, they distort our beliefs, our reactions, our emotions, and our worldview and our perception of ourself. The primary distortion of thinking is called avidya, ignorance, specifically self-ignorance. We see the rope, we know it's there, just as we know that we are here, but because of ignorance, we mistake what it is and believe that it's a snake. Similarly, we know that we exist, but ignorance masks our nature as pure consciousness. And we mistake ourselves to be a body, mind, ego, a jiva. And our problems basically stem from this fundamental ignorance. And from that, our ingrained attachments and aversions, what we think we need in order to be happy and complete. These attachments and aversions are at the root of mental disturbance, along with ignorance and the sense of ego, the sense of me, my, and mineness. So the waves of attachment and aversion, they basically weave a vortex of subtle energy, which is based on avidya, self-ignorance, and bound together by ego, and by the centripetal force of I, me, and mine, and its derivatives of I want, I need, I like, I dislike. Centripetal force means a pressure that basically binds something towards its center. It pulls it inward and compresses it. In this case, all our vasanas, all our driving compulsions and addictions and attachments, they're all bound together by the sense of being a wanting, lacking, needing ego. The sense of being a doer, experiencer entity, rather than simply pure consciousness. So ignorance and the sense of ego, me and minus, of being the experiencer, knower, agent of doership, that's what keeps our vasanas and karma locked in place. That's what keeps us bound in samsara. And ignorance isn't real. It isn't true. It isn't real. And therefore, the problem is not an actual problem. It's a misperception that can only be remedied by knowledge. So what I wanted to do was to end with a little self-inquiry based on the initial practice that we did at the start. So by observing the mind, we came to see that there are two basic principles in play. There's consciousness illumining the mind, and then there's the vrittis, all the arisings in consciousness, whether in the form of images, thoughts, memories, emotions, and so on. These are all just vrittis. They're just formations in the substrate of the mind. Some relate to our perception of the so-called external world, the pramana vrittis, and some relate to the inner world of our own fantasy, imagination, and rumination. Now, what happens is, due to the ignorance and the dualistic convention of our language, our tendency is to claim, I'm thinking, I'm feeling, I'm perceiving. But is this actually true, however? It may seem to be true. It may feel intuitively right, and it may make sense to us. But is that our direct experience? If you really explore your experience watching the mind, what you find is that the impressions, the vrittis, they just arise. They're just experienced. They're just known. They're known by the self-shining, self-illumining, self-evident consciousness that's granting life and sentience to the mind. It's this consciousness that allows things to be known. And it's not an act of knowing either. Consciousness doesn't act. It's not a doer or an agent of knowing. It just knows by its light all things are known. A great example is to think of the sun. The sun shines down upon the world, illumining everything upon the world, enabling all things to be seen, to be known and experienced. Not only that, but its light is able to be reflected upon certain reflecting mediums, like windows, glass, mirrors, and even water. And you might think of a river dancing with sparkling sunlight. Not to mention the moon, which seems to glow with its own light, but which is actually just a reflecting medium for the sun, for sunlight. But is the sun actually doing anything? Is it taking some action in order for this to happen? No, the sun just shines. It doesn't act or do anything. It just shines. That's its swabhava, its nature. By its nature, by its light, all things capable of being illumined are illumined. And in the same way, the self, consciousness, does nothing. It's not an agent of action. The Katha Upanishad says consciousness shines, and all things shine after it. By its light, all things are revealed, and that's how knowledge happens. Consciousness shines on the mind, as it were, which is the nature of sattva, and knowing happens. There's no doership, no doer, no agent of doership involved. So the idea that I am the knower, I am the doer, or I am the thinker, experiencer is just ignorance at work. It's the ego attempting to insert itself and co-opt consciousness. And what is the ego? The technical term for it in Vedanta is the ahamkara, which literally means the I maker. And the ahamkara, under the spell of ignorance, is the root of our sense of being a separate little self, a limited, stressed out little jiva. And here's the thing though, the ego, the ahamkara, and the mind and intellect are actually just vrittis themselves, pervasive but subtle vrittis arising in the field of consciousness. They fall under the category of that which is known, and that which is known can be objectified, can be viewed as an object, and an object cannot be you, the subject. So the idea I'm thinking, this is known by me, this belongs to me, I think, I feel, is actually just a conceptual overlay brought on by ignorance. In actuality, there's just consciousness and the vrittis appearing in consciousness. Just lost my place. Yeah, there's only consciousness and the vrittis appearing in consciousness. These vrittis are mithya. They have no independent existence of their own. They're just projections of Maya, and they're constantly changing and modifying. Whereas the consciousness they appear in is satya. It's unchanging, the unchanging eternal substrate of all existence. So the basic problem of samsara is that ignorance compels us to identify with these vrittis, these objects in consciousness. And that's how we come to see ourselves as a jiva. The impurities of rajas and tamas cast a cloud over the sun that is ourself, and we identify with the shadows they cast. We get pulled into identification with gross and subtle objects. And this results in a tremendous and untenable sense of lack and limitation. And it's this sense of lack and limitation that drives us to take desperate action to try to get back to the wholeness that's actually the very essence of our nature, but which we've seemingly lost. Action generates the attachments and aversions and the vasanas, both good and bad. And when it comes to the bad vasanas, boy, do we suffer. The truth is, however, that you are always free, vasanas or no vasanas. The mind just doesn't have access to that freedom because the clarity of your being, sat, is being obscured by the cloud of rajas and tamas. And that's why the jiva really needs to master the fundamentals of mind management. But self-inquiry really cuts to the heart of the truth, which is everything that you experience, whether good or bad, is all experienced in consciousness. And whatever you experience in consciousness must in fact be consciousness. What else could it be? What other factor is there? Consciousness just is. You don't have to strive to get to it or even find it because it's always hidden in plain sight, right this very second. It's self-shining and self-revealing, self-evident. It has no boundary, no limitation, no beginning and no end. It just is. It's always present, always available, always with you, always is you. You can never lose it. You experience this as your basic sense of amness, of being, of existence. The vrittis in the mind are always chopping and changing, thought after thought, feeling after feeling. But the consciousness, the amness revealing them, is changeless. It's always the same. It's the changeless context in which the content of your life, your karma stream unfolds. So the key that I'm trying to convey is that you can free your mind at any point by negating the objects, the vrittis, as mithya, as ultimately unreal, and reducing everything to this basic amness or isness, which alone is real because it never changes. So here's a practical tool that you can apply. When you're facing down the vasanas or any kind of unpleasant experience in general, recognize it as a vritti, an object arising in your mind, and ask yourself this: how is this known? What is it that reveals this? This immediately breaks the spell of mithya and brings you back to the satya, the sat, the being of your own essential nature. That which reveals everything is the light of your own consciousness. Consciousness is always present, always immediate, always accessible, for it's self-shining and self-evident. It doesn't need anything else in order to reveal it. It's the innermost essence of you, and as such, you can never lose it. The vasanas and all the self-limiting thoughts that cycle through the mind, they don't pertain to you, the real you, and they don't say anything about you. They're just ignorance. They're just clouds passing the sun. They don't affect you in any way because you are the sun. And I think I'm going to leave it there because I've already gone on quite a bit, and I hope that that made some sense. Right, wondering if we have any questions. Questions, complaints? I don't think we do, actually.
Rory,
Unless
that
I'm
was
mistaken.
great. Thank you.
Oh, hi. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, thank you very much. That was really, really well done.
Thank you. I'm glad it made sense.
Rory, can I ask a question?
Yep, absolutely. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, how you doing? Thank
good,
you
thank you.
guys for the talk, and Ben, wonderful. The question I had was when you talked about vrittis and how we get some space, or I think Ben talked about that, maybe it was, but you at one point you touched on vrittis, and it made me wonder. I never actually asked this question before. In meditation, for instance, there's different experiences that come that are different than normal thoughts, and there seems to be a different type of experience there, but yet still an experience. Are those considered vrittis as well, like these types of meditation experiences?
Yeah, they're all vrittis. When you're in meditation, your consciousness basically is accessing kind of deeper and more heightened states of consciousness. So rather than having vrittis coming up about your grocery list or kind of your washing or something that happened at work, you're more likely to experience subtler forms because the mind's in a more revealing sattvic kind of state of being. So the vasanas, the thoughts which come up, are more likely to pertain to knowledge and the deeper aspects of the psyche.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, because that was one of the first teachings that I got from James when I had relayed some of my meditation experiences to him, and his response was, well, who was the one witnessing the disappearance of Jeremy, you know? He got me on that one. I was like, oh, that's a good point. But yeah, it does seem to be a very distinct, different type of thought, I guess, you know. So
Yeah.
thank you. And
What
I don't know if
happens, you're accessing deeper aspects of consciousness, and as Ramji says, the secret is always bringing it back to consciousness. Who
Mm.
is it that's aware of this? Yeah, and the same with dreams, because in the dream state, all kinds of different things come up, because the vrittis then they're not conditioned by sort of the external senses, it's the inner senses. So
Mm.
you're kind of moving your attention inward, and what comes up is a kind of it comes from deeper aspects of the psyche. And yeah, but again, it's the consciousness, the awareness that's revealing everything, and that's the unchanging factor. That's what you are. And that's basically what we're kind of trying to lead ourselves to, the realization that we are the unchanging.
Mm. Okay. Thank you. That was what just off the top of my head. Thanks.
Thank you.
Rory, this is Damien.
Hi, Damien.
Hi, thank you so much. Before you got to the final opposite thought, maybe to remember that we are the background or the pure consciousness, I think you had alluded to Ramji often suggesting that we think the opposite thought in order to neutralize the power of particularly disturbing vasanas. And my thought is that what you ended on, I can think of as the ultimate opposite thought to vrittis in general. We're most concerned, of course, about the binding, disturbing vasanas, and so we think in opposite thoughts that may be directly parallel to the content of that disturbing vasana, but that the ultimate opposite thought is the key that you gave us. And so I thought, this is really a kind of expansion of the opposite thought technique.
Yeah.
It's the key to the power of opposite thought thinking, the ultimate opposite thought.
Yeah, you can't go
That
beyond
which-
that consciousness. It's like
Right.
it
right.
brings you to the ultimate kind of like truth. It's like there's nothing beyond it. You can't actually go behind that. You can't sort of go deeper than that. It's just, yeah, the ultimate truth of what we are. So to begin with, we're dealing with all these thoughts, these kind of reactions, these vasanas, these habits. But again, it's taking the acts of discrimination, getting to the very heart of the matter is we're the unchanging consciousness. And no matter what's going on in the subtle body, the mind, and the senses, we are that which is always untouched, always present, always self-evident, self-shining, self-illuminating. That's like the ultimate. You can't really go further than that.
Thank you so much, Rory. And P.S. I love your blue room. It's like you're sitting in this
Oh, thank you.
blue lotus bubble crystal. It's beautiful.
Thank you. It's pretty calming. I like it. Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Rory, you have one question in the chat. Can you see
Oh.
the chat?
Oh yeah, I see that. 33 new messages. Wow.
Yep.
Who's the question by, Sundari?
I'll tell you now. It's somebody called Kelz. Not sure who. Just says KELZ. You see it?
I can't
A
actually. I'm
quick
still
question.
scrolling.
Are the effects of our karma, Punya Papa, also determined by vrittis? So if I have a Papa experience, if I change my thought on it, it changes to Punya? That's the question for you.
Okay, I think I understand that.
In a sense, yeah.
Yeah, if we basically the karma which we have, good or bad, and there's no getting around the fact that we will have a mixture of the two. I remember Swami Dayananda once saying that just having been born into the world is a certain degree of papa. It means that we've got issues that we have to it means we've got karma that we have to work out. And I think the key is mind management helps not just to kind of manage the mind and help us feel more sattvic and reduce the effects of rajas and tamas, but you can actually transmute your karma. You can take a bad situation and find the good in it. And some people are experts at taking good situations and finding the bad in them. some people seem to excel at doing that, but no, absolutely, it's possible to transmute our papa karma, our bad or our challenging karma into something positive, into something good. I'm not sure if that answers the
It's
question.
actually a thought. I mean, in essence, it's all karma, but he's speaking specifically about thoughts. In other words, if you change your thoughts, you'll change your karma stream, which is correct.
Oh, I see it. Yeah. Yeah, because basically we're experiencing everything as thought.
Yes.
Yeah, so the karma which we're experiencing is the thought of the karma. And if we change the thought we're thinking about it, we change the experience.
Yeah, and we also eliminate blowback karma, which is a big
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the keys to navigating this world.
Yeah, for sure.
Alchemy.
Roy, you've done such a great job. You must be exhausted.
Well, thank you. I'm quite tired. It's going to pass my bedtime. I'm not really an evening person. But
Well,
it's been,
I know what it takes of you to do these things. So thank you so much.
it's
You were
been
really
wonderful, wonderful to speak
I
to
loved
everyone,
it.
to
You
be
and
able to
Ben.
share.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Rory.
It's Ramji.
Oh, Ramji. Yep, I think that's all the questions.
Hey Rory, it's Barrett here. I have one last question for you.
Oh,
Hi,
fire away.
hi. You I great talk by both Ben and yourself. Really, really good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
In terms of just very quickly, like during meditation, whether closed eyes or open eyes, you know, you mentioned and I can completely relate consciousness and the vritti, and that kind of raises a new thought in my mind about a duality between consciousness and revealing the vritti. Though that in itself is a thought which consciousness is revealing. So how to go from that duality of consciousness and vritti to oneness,
Just consciousness.
to just consciousness. And uh, I just wanted to check with you. So by having that thought that this is a duality between consciousness and vritti is yet another thought. I think, as the gentleman said a moment ago, an opposing thought, but that opposing thought is a thought that's still being revealed. It's always being revealed.
Yeah.
I'll be interested in your opinion on that.
If I understand the question, basically there is an experience of duality when the body, mind, when the subtle body, gross body is illumined by consciousness, when we're basically in this field. And we have the experience of duality, there's the subject object kind of experience. And the way which we negate that is with the self-inquiry. We kind of recognize that everything that we're actually experiencing in consciousness. So the thoughts, the seeming duality is actually an experience happening in consciousness. One of the points I think I made was that anything you experience in consciousness has to be consciousness. There's nothing else there. You can't have consciousness plus some other factor. So the experience of objects in consciousness can ultimately be kind of boiled down to consciousness. That's the one unchanging factor. And we have the seeming effect of these objects and vrittis, but ultimately with self-knowledge, you negate them and you're left with just the one changeless factor.
Sure. Thank you.
I don't know if that helps.
Maybe can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ramji.
Maybe the answer, a good answer would be that there's no thought that's opposite to consciousness. There's no thought that
Yeah.
negates consciousness.
Exactly. That's
There's
kind
a
of what I was
difference
trying to say.
between consciousness and the thought of consciousness. They're the same, but they're different. This is why getting this clear what the relationship between consciousness and thought is difficult, because they're the same, but they're also different. The thought delivers you there, as you said and Ben said, the thought will deliver you to the self, to consciousness, right? But then the thought isn't equivalent to consciousness, it's just a delivery system.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all. And then the thought, I'm consciousness, drops off because you've got to where you want to go. It's, in other words, there's a difference between the means and the end. The thought is just a means of knowledge. When you get to the end, it's like in the football, when in American football at any rate, or I suppose in the European football, immediately when that ball passes into the net, the ball becomes totally uninteresting and just left on the ground, and everybody's running around celebrating. Prior to that, the ball was the most important thing, and immediately when it passes this line, so the knowledge takes you through past the line of Maya, which and once you're past the line of Maya, you're in consciousness. So you're not even in consciousness, you are consciousness. So there's no contradiction between Satya and Mithya. People think that Satya is one state and Mithya is another, but the word Satya and the word Mithya, there is a problem. That's duality. But the actual Satya and Mithya are not in conflict. So one is just helps you to get to the one place and to get to Satya, to get free of your vrittis, of your whirlpools. Like with the question that Jeremy had, yeah, any thought, it doesn't matter if it's deep or not or whatever it is, any good thought, bad thought, it's just a thought. It's something objective to consciousness and can be immediately dismissed as not self. When you dismiss an object as not self, you're left as the self. So it's equivalent to the akhandakar vritti, in other words, the thought of consciousness. So,
Yeah, because there's no opposite to the self. It's that
Yeah.
one thing which has no opposite. There's nothing other than it.
and every single teaching of Vedanta does the same thing if you think about it and follow it through carefully. So you don't really need all to understand all of Vedanta. You just have to understand one teaching properly, and then you can see how every single teaching delivers the same knowledge, i.e. experience, the experience of your wholeness and completeness, and the satisfaction that comes from knowing that you're whole and complete. It's erased the notion that you are somehow, not up to the mark, that you're somehow less than what you are, which causes all this sense of low self-esteem and inauthenticity that we see in the world today. So, good. Really great, you guys. You've done a great job. I'm so proud of you guys.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I-
Ramji.
I-
great session.
I
learn
mean,
from the
I am
best.
a good teacher, but you guys are better because you'd worked it out. So good for you. Cool.
Rory,
Pardon?
this is Ron. I have a question for Rory,
Good.
if I could?
How you doing?
Hi, I guess you can see me. I'm always sensitive to language like we take ourselves to be an ego. So at the level of experience upon just noticing, it seems that there's a description that may be more refined, perhaps more accurate, which is, it seems that consciousness takes itself to be the person that manifests it. And then we arise, we are the result. And that's why we can't just directly say, well, I'm not going to be myself as an ego. I mean, you could say that, but I mean, it's the ego that says that. So isn't it actually factually the most accurate to say that consciousness loses itself in the organism that manifests it, and it leads to Maya, you might say?
Unaware.
At the
Other way
at the kind of relative order of reality, ultimately consciousness is beyond duality in any sense. But what we're experiencing with the addition of Maya is this kind of objective reality. So it's consciousness functioning through the body, mind, and ego. So it really depends on what kind of order of reality you're talking about. At this order of reality, yeah, that's completely true to say consciousness is under the spell of avidya, ignorance. Whereas ultimately the self, yeah, has no kind of contact with Mithya. The self is kind of transcendent, it's everything, it's limitless. It's impossible that the self has any limitation, but seemingly when Maya is operant, it's as though consciousness loses itself to ignorance and identifies with the aggregates of body and mind and ego. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does.
Yeah, Maya makes anything possible, including the fact that consciousness can think that it's an ego. Ignorance, that's an ignorant thought, but that's a thought, and nonetheless, and it's only possible because of ignorance. So ignorance makes anything possible. In other words, you say anything can happen in Maya, and anything does. The most extraordinary things are happening every day. Just look around you. I mean, people sit there right there in front of something and deny its existence. You know, they're experiencing something and they immediately deny that it's there, and everyone else can see that it's obviously there. So how is that possible? You know, in other words, the thought just shuts off their perception, direct perception of objects, and they identify with an erroneous notion. It's happening all the time. And so, you know, I thought it was a good point that you made that that the whole society is trying to determine, you know, the value of evidence, because what is evidence? Is a thought evidence of an object outside itself, or do we need confirmation from various sources to determine the evidence of things outside yourself? What's reality here? You know, and if you're living in a society, it's fine if you live in living alone in a cave. It's fine if you live in your fantasies, but if you're living with other people, you're going to have some sort of objective, you know, agreement on what evidence actually is. That pratibhasika satyam, in other words, the subjective reality, is only evidence of itself. It doesn't prove evidence of the presence or absence of something outside. So, yeah.
I'd like to add something there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mithya Maya is a teaching tool.
Yeah.
Ultimately, when I stand in myself as consciousness, there is only consciousness. Mithya is a temporary teaching tool which has to be discarded at the end.
Yep. Yeah, Satya too. Satya Mithya, there's no, people think, you know, this is a famous remnant of left over from the teaching. The people that need to get rid of in Vedanta is the idea that, you know, Satya and Mithya are actually are actually facts. No, they're just teaching tools. That's all they are. Because there's no Satya and Mithya if reality, you know, Satya and Mithya can't be different if reality is non-dual. In other words, if there's only one without a second, as Vedanta says, there's only consciousness. So that's right, Ben. Absolutely.
And ultimately you get to a point where you throw away the teaching tools because you don't need them. There's just consciousness, awareness. There's just the truth, the self.
Yeah, in
And-
fact, it says in the Vedas,
Yeah.
what use is a cup of water when the whole land is flooded? What
Yeah.
use is, huh? A glass full of water when the whole land is flooded. It's useless. You got water everywhere. What do you focused on this tiny little fraction of this great reality? So it's a throwaway, but you don't want to throw it away too soon. That's the problem. A lot of people throw it away once and they think they've thrown it away forever, but you have to continue to maintain the knowledge that, I'm awareness until what? Until there really isn't any duality left. And you can't say, well, on the Mithya level, I'm this, and that's okay because it's only Mithya. And on the Satya level, I'm that because, so I'm real and I get to play in the Maya. No, you don't get to play in the Maya. That's the joke. It looks like you get to play in the Maya, but there's no Maya to play in, because Maya's ignorance and it's as good as non-existent. Even though it exists, it's as good as non-existent because it's not real. It doesn't stand on its own. The definition of reality is what you can't dismiss or negate. Only that is what's free. And only that only candidate for that particular category is what? Existence shining as whole and complete, unconcerned, unborn, ordinary awareness. So good. That's a good question. That's a good thought. So some of you guys are really coming up with some great stuff here.
Ramji,
Yeah.
Myself was drawn to Vedanta because I never had a very strong bhakti sense, or even though I've been in prayer and in ceremonial circles and all of that for my whole life, I was very rarely to have a very strong sense of God or Ishwara, as we call it,
Devotion to God, you mean?
Yeah.
What about the
But
Great
what-
Spirit?
what-
I mean, isn't the Great Spirit God? Didn't you have bhakti?
Yeah, but
You
I've
didn't
always
know.
been more like explain it to me, right? But when we talk about there's only Satya, or there's really no other thing than ourself, what are we to make of this sense as we're going down this road, that there's a sense that there's almost a type of a conspiracy, like God is unfolding this thing in his own way or his own plan. The bhakti aspect, or this connection or a feeling of a larger awareness than the small self, kind of orchestrating this whole thing. You know what I mean? What are we to make of that?
Well, that's
Because it
where
seems more and
conspiracy
more
comes.
real.
Yeah, conspiracy comes from Maya. It does feel like a conspiracy, but think of it in terms of love. I mean, you're right.
Not a bad conspiracy, but yeah.
How many loves do you have?
One, I guess.
Yeah, that's the answer. Own one love. There's only
Yeah.
one love. Right. Understand. So everything you do is love doing things for the sake of itself. Doing, quote unquote. If there's any doing that's taking place, it's you whose nature is love. In other words, it's love, loving love. So when you fall in love, it's only yourself falling in love with yourself. And you can only do that if you've been ignorant. Because you should always be in love with yourself. There's no other option. If you're not in love with yourself, it means you're ignorant of yourself, right? This is what Vedanta, because go back to the original principle in the Upanishad, in the source text, right? All this is consciousness. And consciousness equals love. The self-consciousness is Sat, existence, it's Chit, awareness, and it's Anandam, love. So those are all synonyms. They're all equivalent. So, think of bhakti. You are bhakti, and every single thing you do is what? For the sake of the love of yourself. It says in the Upanishad, it says the wife doesn't love the husband for the husband's sake. The wife loves the husband for her sake. The husband doesn't love life for his wife's sake. He loves it for his own sake. He loves the wife for his own sake. You don't love your kids for their sake. You love the kids because it pleases you to love them. And if you don't love your kids, you know, it pleases you not to love your kids because maybe they're little jerks or whatever it is, and you want to get rid of them, you know, but it's all for you, no matter what you do or think or feel. This is real hard for people to get, you know, because we got this duality, this sense of, you know, there's different kinds of love, and the Satya and Mithya, there's more than one thing that's real, and so forth and so on. So yeah, Ishwara looks like a pervert sometimes.
Sometimes.
Ishwara delivers dharma and it delivers adharma. In other words, Ishwara is ignorance of the self. So it delivers dharma, and dharma seems to be real when you're experiencing it, and then it delivers adharma, and that seems to be real as you're experiencing it. So you think the world's a mess at one point when you're experiencing that way, and then you think it's a wonderful place when you're experiencing that way. But that's impossible. Because how do you know which is actually real? If you got two things, who's going to determine which one is actually real? It's not possible.
Would you say like, but we say like there's a sense of you can only go so far on your own as an individual, as a jiva, where
Yeah.
you come up to this point where you need this, you're like, okay, this is as far as I can get it, and there's got to be some, I've got to prepare
That's
myself
right.
for this
This
grace.
leads to another statement that Roy made that he did. It's just a word he used in terms when he was talking pramanams. He said testimony. I bet you most of you missed that. Most of you didn't understand about testimony. Testimony means what? The testimony of a competent witness is the means of knowledge. What is the testimony for the statement that what? That the self is real, and that the self is all there is, and that you are the self. What is that? Aptavakya, a competent witness. What is a competent witness? The scripture. What is it? How does the scripture, right, communicate with us? Through rishis, through the people who know, through the gurus who know. That's and that is a valid means of knowledge. If you look at science and these people are trying to figure out what reality is, they'll never get there because they have no faith in the competent witness. That they keep wanting to prove it experientially. They keep, and there's no way that you can prove it experientially, because the means of knowledge that they have are what? Are material instruments that are incapable of recording the presence of consciousness and what? And describing the nature of consciousness. So the only way you're going to get free and understand what exists and shine as consciousness is through Vedanta Pramanam. In other words, through the testimony of the scripture. And that scripture is not going to do it unless you have a guru who's communicating the scripture properly. Which means he or she has to have been properly taught by what? A guru. And what's the guru? The first guru. What would the first guru be? Ishwara. So these are the words of Ishwara, and they're only revealed by the rishis. That's the point. And it can only be that way because there's only one way the world was created, and that is by ignorance. It was never created any other way. This is like high-level stuff now.
Yeah.
But we're, it's glad that we got there, and we're supposed to get there and hear this teaching. We're about to add a whole new level to the Vedanta teaching that some of you may be familiar with, but probably aren't, and that's the Sanatana Dharma, the rubric under which Vedanta is slotted down into a tiny little fraction of the big picture, which is laid out in the Sanatana Dharma. And we'll explain that. We're gonna change the website to reflect that. And we'll open up a whole new dimension for you shortly, within the next however long it takes. Month or so, I suppose. So previews of coming attractions, be there. And don't forget to donate. We need help. We got to change the website. It's going to cost us about 10 grand. So those of you who got a little extra cash or whatever it is, be sure to donate and just put a notice. You know, this is for that particular thing. The money will go to Shining World. Just donate on the Shining World side of the donation page on the left side, and it'll all go to Shining World, and then we can actualize this teaching. Going to expand it a little bit more.
Thank you.
And the other point is, when the jiva reaches its end, can't go any further, that's where one of the qualifications of Shraddha, that trust. Because we've reached the end of what we can do with our minds.
Yeah.
So
Then
the next step has to be trust in the scripture.
Yeah, you have no choice, and you will get to that point if you see that this is a zero sum, that Maya is a zero sum reality. You cannot win and you cannot lose. And
That's yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Ramji.
that should generate incredible dispassion that should morph into or change into extreme desire to what? To satisfy yourself. Because it's very dissatisfying being here with a bunch of energy and discovering that there's no place you can put that energy that's gonna work here in this world.
That seems to be the place where I'm at, I think, is right up to the edge of this level of trust, where it's like, okay, I cannot engage in any of these behaviors anymore because they create too much backlash, too much pain.
Yeah.
But now I have to trust. It feels like a trust. Yeah, it feels like
it's trust.
What happens when all that goes away, you know?
You got to have love for the guru and the teaching. If you have the proper love for the guru and the teaching, you can take the teaching literally. And once you take these are the words of God. The words of God can be taken literally. You don't even have to have faith in them. That faith becomes hard and fast knowledge if you have trust. It took me quite a while. And Ishwar created this little charade that made me just accept things as exactly as I knew them and as exactly as the teaching was. And it just took me out of the picture altogether. In other words, that jiva person, it just wiped that person out. There was just it was clear. I knew that I wasn't that jiva person, but I didn't feel it with a kind of certainty and the kind of confidence that comes when you just totally turn it all over to the scripture, to the guru and the scripture. So yeah, that's called bhakti, non-dual bhakti. We have a special name for it. It's called prema, Prema. It's different from just love.
Yeah, it breaks your heart kind of thing. It's
it breaks your heart. Breaks your heart. Yeah, it just breaks everything. And the only thing it can't break is what it is. It's love. It's the solid rock or the foundation or the substrate on which the whole creation is what? Created and sustained and destroyed. So love is all there is. What the Beatles song, Love Is All There Is. That I'm sure that song came up when they were like with Maharishi. With Maharishi Yogi. That's where they got that, I'm sure. George Harrison and the Beatles. They went there, and Maharishi had some issues his own self and didn't even know what he was saying, but he chanted the mantras and said the truth, and they heard it, and they got that song about it. And that is the truth. There is only love. But non-duality means.
Ramji, I have to leave. I've got to go to work. It's morning here.
Oh, yeah, Ben. Yeah, okay. Yeah, take it easy. Thanks very much, Ben. That was
Thank you,
that,
Benji.
I love your charts, man. They knock my charts out of the ballpark. They're fabulous.
They're all yours.
Thanks,
Huh?
Ben. Take
They're
care.
all
Love you.
yours.
Cool. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Rory.
God bless you, Ben.
Thank you. Hario.
Good night, Benji. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good
It's
night.
morning here. Sorry, I'm
Oh,
going to
good
work.
morning, Ben.
Morning. Yeah, have a cup of coffee and go to work.
Yeah, it's Australia, the other end.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All
Rory,
right.
I think we must say good night to you too. Ramji,
you.
we must let
Yeah.
Rory go.
Okay. Well, Roy can go, but yeah, thank you, Rory.
You're
Thank you
very
so
welcome.
much.
It's great to see
Thank
you
you so
both.
much, Rory. It was very
Thank
beautiful.
you, everyone.
Oh, thank you.
Well, and thank all of you guys for paying attention and coming up with a great song.
Yeah, it's been a great one.
Am I on next week?
Yes, we're on next week.
Okay, yeah, I just written a couple of them this week that are really, really good. So I can do them, or I can tidy up the Maya one.
We'll talk about it when you get back.
All right. Good. All
Good
right.
night, everybody.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you all.
Yep. Thank you, Ramji.
You bet.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Ramji.
Yeah, Des, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank me.
See, there you go. Yeah. Be sure yourself you give yourself a big pat on the back. Always.
End the recording.
I don't know. I don't control it, can I? I don't.
I don't know.
I think Sundari's got to.
started it.
The Sundari, you're in charge of it. I think.
Stopped it then. She's gone.
Oh, maybe she's gone.
Oh, no, I think she's still there.
Is she still there? I don't know. It's hard to tell.
See it. I just gotta read it. Hold on.
Oh, I can end here. I can end it here. Huh?
Connecting to, she's connecting to audio.
What?
It'll end, I'm sure.
It'll end.
Actually, you can stop
Oh,
recording.
yeah,
Can we do
Sundari,
it?
you can record it, huh? You can
No.
end it, huh, Sundari?
I got it.
Oh. Well, that would be over here, wouldn't it?
Right here.